Well, good morning to you all. Thanks for coming. And what I would like, as I said, to share with you, well, probably as Martin asked, just to introduce myself. So I am Luis Meneses. I am a Brazilian that I have lived for 17 years in the southwest part of the Amazon, and close to the Peruvian and Bolivian border, and one small state for Amazon dimensions. It's bigger than England. That's called the state of Acre, that has, like for 12 years, has been struggling to develop or to be sustainable policies in the Amazon. And I had the pleasure to live there for 17 years, and now recently I moved to Oxford to work for a global canopy program that's based here in Oxford, and really, you know, matching our interests and purposes, because they are really, they have been dedicating a lot of energy in terms of valuing the natural capital of forests. So really going into the payment for environmental services as one possible way to really change the situation of our tropical forests in the world. I have worked a lot with indigenous people, rubber tappers, policy. I was head of the Amazon program for WWF Brazil for 6 years. And the last 4 years I have worked as consultant in terms of environmental services, as I think it's the next frontier we have to tap in. So, so before, I think I gave a bit of a title that I think it's not, that's more of a question than a title, right? So how we could make RED work within these multiple scales. And I think one of the most interesting things of RED is the power of engaging these all segments of society, from the people on the ground. Indigenous people are talking about it, rubber tappers are talking about it, small households, you know, traditional communities or whatever, big business in tropical areas as well. You have the NGOs engaged from the local level to an international policy level. You have subnational governments wants to be in the game, and all the discussions in the international arena. So it's a very powerful theme, and the power of engagement around that is very interesting. So what I would like to share with you a little bit is what are the challenges that all these RED issue has to face, and also these two experiences. One is the Brazilian principle and social criteria that was made from this society, offered to influence policies and RED projects and programs. And the other one, some subnational initiatives in Brazil, so related to the Amazon governments that are doing and dealing with that. So I think what we have in terms of RED is, so far, it's the most tangible environmental services payment schemes that we have. And so far, it's not that near, right? It's really still being such a hard thing to make it come true. But actually, it's what we have in terms of environmental services payments at hand. It's concerning carbon. The other issue is that, so the capillarity of this theme, as we talked, among the multiple scales from the ground to the international policy levels. And as I told, this power of engagement of this theme in relation to all these levels of how society organizes from local level to international level. RED, one of the first challenges on that is RED, it's supposed to work in a, you know, in a landscape like this, where forests are really threatened. But I think the first challenge as well is how we deal with forests like this, intact forests. So pretty much how we can address also the stocks of forests that are out there. and not only the real threatened forest. One of the other things is the top-down or bottom-up, how we merge these two, processes into a one process together. The other is social issues, right? Recognition of rights, the participation, transparency, benefit sharing are all issues being discussed. And also the technicalities of carbon, the boring part of it. That is, so like how do you monitor, how do you don't double account, how you guarantee permanence, how you work with additionality and leakage. So all these hard things that imposes huge challenges for whoever is offering, say, RED benefits. And also, of course, the political and policy issues as well. So what are the architectures that we can work in this from the international level to, the benefit sharing closer to forest holders? The carbon ownership or carbon rights as well is a big issue related to land tenure, and also to really the right of communities, for example, that steward the forest in a way that forests keep standing, but probably they don't own the land. It belongs to the government, so what about the carbon? And how we generate resources as well, right? So how we can make a bulk of money that would generate resources that would flow to forest holders. And of course, how you deliver that on the ground. So, endless, probably there are more than this, but they're not simple issues, right? I think one of the things is that probably these challenges are really draining the, the enthusiasm and of many people that started being involved with RED. I'm really thinking on the next thing now, because I think RED is getting too complicated, and so what we have to do next. But this is an interesting process that we made in Brazil. The big motivation for this was that organizations from the civil society were very worried in terms of what could happen in terms of impacts in communities and also environments with this scene that we have no regulation and we don't have like, market rules are not sufficient at all, right? And also lots of carbon cowboys. About 2 years ago in the Amazon, there were lots of carbon cowboys. These companies that would come and just like persuade this indigenous community by first signing a contract. Say we do all the thing and we share the benefits of and the revenues of that. And so, and really in a subject that people were not very much, having knowledge of it. And so how we could deal with these opportunistic actions are also in the region. So we decided to come with this principle and criteria that I would say that we are not setting the high bar, as you would have, for example, the climate and biodiversity, but community, CCBA, so it's climate, community and biodiversity, and care standards, for example, that's setting the high bar. Above that, they consider silver, golden, RED credits generated that. We're really thinking on what is the minimal rules that should be, so the low bar, where projects should comply with in order to respect minimum social and environmental safeguards. And the purpose of this is not only located to like private RED projects or like larger scale programs. It was really for all the ranges of RED initiatives that we could find. And the main goal is to influence the policies. So what we did is we get it like this process was carried out by society and not by government, right? So government was not involved. And participation of whoever was affected by RED, and also a transparent process. So how we did it is we set this multi-sector community. It's about 20 representatives from all the sectors of society. So we got the big farmers, the industry. The industry was not that interested, but the big farmers were there. Rubber tappers, traditional people, small households in settlement projects, NGOs, were all set together, and under the facilitation of one organization called Imaflora, we came up with the first version of these principles. And then the second step was a public consultation process. So multi-sectoral, so each of these representatives, they were responsible to engage with their own sector to collect their inputs for the standard or the principle and criteria. And it was open also to society by internet. So we had 4 consultation workshops in the Amazon involving leaderships from indigenous groups, extractivists, small households. We had 1 sector meeting with the private sector, and also we had received comments by internet, and more than 200 people were involved, more than 500 comments received. And then the last part of that was the multi-sector committee evaluating the final version, which contained 8 principles and 27 criteria. If you are interested, I think, we wrote this book that shows us really what it was. It was not only the Brazilian experience on that, but what is a process that you could do to engage civil society in building these RED principles. And this is in Spanish, Portuguese, and English. And it really, how the Brazilian experience, what was the case of that process, how the Brazilian experience did. So we launched it last year in Cancun, and you were all welcome to have a look on that. And I was in Guyana 2 weeks ago, and we were just discussing if it would be an interesting thing to be done also in Guyana, as like social safeguards is one of the things that are hampering Guyana from receiving, for example, the Norway resources. You're taking notes, right? So if you, it's a long thing, right? And in Portuguese, that'll make you easier. Can go back to that. But probably I can jump into the next subject. What I'm going to talk about is like how these Amazon states or subnational levels are facing RED. And I want to first talk about the Governor's Climate Forest Task Force. This task force was, pulled together by Arnold Schwarzenegger in 2008. So gathering some U.S. states such as Illinois, Wisconsin, and of course California, that among of those 3, only California is thinking of international offsets related to RED. But also engaged another 13 early movers, states and provinces around the world. And if we put together, this is 21% of the world's tropical forests within this group. So it's kind of powerful and relevant. And this process, if I show you a bit the 4 tasks we have been dealing, and I have been involved with this since the beginning of this task force. And the 4 tasks, you can have like a clear picture of what's being, the purpose of this group. First thing is like subnational RED framework, so like the technicalities and all the rules that have to be perceived. So this is addressing all those as I mentioned, the boring parts of the RED. So it's really like how do you prove that you are achieving the expected outcomes in terms of reduction of deforestation, but also how you address social safeguards, participation, and things like that. The other important aspect is interesting because they are now trying to come up with a fund, a GCF fund, that would work to collective needs of these groups. And there are several collective needs in terms of, for example, register systems or carbon rights. How to address carbon rights within these different 13 different political frameworks that these states are. And also there are two other tasks that are related. One is the knowledge database, and I coordinated this process to generate information of how these states are pulling together their RED programs and initiatives, and also how we really engage stakeholders and work in a transparency process. Another important thing, just to highlight a little bit the task force, I think it's how they're open to financing sources, because it really usually it has some problems in relation to what the federal or the national government thinks and sees it. You see that they're open to public funds, but also to markets, voluntary or compliance, but also to other no-market and market opportunities. So they're open to all sources of funding, while national governments have lots of restrictions, in Brazil pretty much related to these carbon markets, and especially the compliance carbon markets. Looking at the Brazilian Amazon, now you see here the 9 Brazilian states. This red part is pretty much deforestation, but sometimes is also related to savannas. As you could see here is savanna. But you could see that Acre state, this is where I lived, the Amazonas state, bigger than Peru, and Pará state, Amapá state, and Mato Grosso, they were all involved in GCF, and they are like early movers to come up with subnational RED programs. One common approaches of these groups is that they're really working or trying to involve the stakeholders. Many of them, 3 of those, Amazonas, Mato Grosso, and Pará, have established climate change forum with several sectors of society, really to see how they could come up with environmental services policies. In the state of Acre, we developed this RED program involving NGOs and communities since the beginning, before elaborating what would be the law. Another interesting thing is the scope of these policies. They are not talking only about RED and carbon. They are really focusing on environmental services and the wider scope of the forests. And that's an important message, because it's like how people see their forests is not only a reductionist approach of the carbon, but in the wider environmental services that they know that the forests deliver to humanity. And another important thing is that they see as the revenues that would come from RED as one way to support a transition in economy from an extensive to a more intensive land use management. So it would be important, as an important flow of resources that could make this change into a more sustainable development and sustainable land use management. Let's go to the 2 most advanced. Amazonas just released their state policy, and Acre did October last year. If we see the scope, what are the strategic programs that these laws consider, you see the wide scope that they're dealing with. Although, when you go really into the detail, they are detailing more the carbon aspect of these programs. Probably because this is the most tangible. but really keen on developing other financial sources that could, pay for the other services. All of these policies are turning around the issues of the bodies that are advisory bodies that have advisors from society, regulation, control and monitoring, implementation, and registry systems. This is a common thing among all of them. And also, but now let me introduce you. Probably this could be a little bit complicated, but I want to just give you a detail in terms of how the architecture lands in a situation in Acre, for example, how they are coming up with this infrastructure for the RAD program. We have 3 dimensions. So what is the dimension of participation, the dimension of the public steering or steering of the process, and the private sector relation with that. So the Environment Secretary, called SEMA, it supervises an institute that was created, and it's pretty much says by its name, for regulation, control, and registry. It's advised by a science committee on methodologies and things like that. And it's overseen by a state commission that it has representatives from the society and government. And its role is approve the regulation and approve projects and programs as well. Now, the execution arm of this arrangement, it's an agency, and in Brazil we have an agency for environmental services development, and in Brazil we have a category of juridical personality, as we call it, of public-private companies. So you could, it's capital from public sector, but also from private sector, a little more agility to deal with process than government agencies, but some social control, more social control than a private company. So this agency is overseen by the forest secretary in the government, and what happens is that the institute puts out a call for a program or a project related to RED, and the agency or any other organization could present a proposal of a project, an action plan. And then the institute, if approved by the institute and by the State Commission, it issues a pre-registry. And once they develop the whole thing, they implement it, they have an independent audit if it's approved, and then they registry what would be the credits out of there. And then it could be sold, the credits out of this. There's some doubts that it's not very clear and that they haven't really figured out yet. But there is a forest fund that is a public fund that in the law it is said as to be the one to manage and steer all these resources that are fundraised for the program. So public funds are one of the lowest things in Brazil. Like more than £2,000, you have to do a public bidding. It takes 6 months. So it's a slow process to really deal with a variety of expenses that you would have to have in a RAD program. So, and the agency has a role of fundraising. So my concern is that all the money fundraised here has to go to the forest fund, and how they implement only through forest fund public bidding processes. And also, once they sell credits, this part of the revenue comes back to the program. So you see it's an intricate and complicated system. And just final considerations, and then we could jump into a bit of discussions. And what I think that even if in Acre that has really committed with sustainable development policies for the last 12 years, it's really hard for Acre to comply with all the standards that are expected. I would say that Acre has signed an MOU within the GCF process, as well as Chiapas in Mexico, last year in California, to really come up with a linkage agreement that would be like the legal framework that Acre and California could do offset trading. They had one meeting only, I think, this year, and they have to deliver something as a recommendation by October to be starting the pilot phase to be implemented in 2012. And what I've heard from my colleagues is that they are demanding too much, so what it would happen like with other situations in Africa or even like in Indonesia or other countries in the or these states in the Amazon? How would they comply with all these standards? The other thing is the tension between national and subnational governments. Indonesia, for example, the national government already said that they won't have subnational RED programs in Indonesia. There's a big tension between, like the Brazilian government wants the monopoly of the RED policy and revenues being channeled through them. They don't want markets to be included. And why you see states really open to markets, because these funds, public funds, won't be enough to really deliver the amount of resources that would be important to really change the situation. But states also do not have a capacity of really engaging finance sector to come up with new and more innovative mechanisms. And an important thing probably in the states is that they have more capacity of governance than the national governments to deliver results in terms of the deforestation, and by the Brazilian laws, they are the ones that have to deliver. And finally, the aspects of the crucial role of civil society in defining the mechanisms, how they want the benefits to be shared, and how they would deliver results. So that is fundamental. And probably in the subnational level, you have more proximity between the ones that really are the forest holders and the policy level.